Hello, it's Wednesday, July 12th, 2017. You are listening to Inception Radio Network, voice of the fringe majority. This is Carol Carl with UFO Headline News. So, who's up for a little celestial drama in the sky tonight? Well, we can see Draco the Great Dragon of the North. That's pretty intense. If we've got a dark sky, we can make acquaintance with the constellation Draco the Dragon, starting at nightfall. At mid-northern latitudes, Draco is a circumpolar constellation, meaning it's out all night long, every night of the year. Northern Hemisphere summer evenings are the best time to look because that's when dragons' flashing eyes look down upon you from high up in the northern sky. But, of course, there will be charts to show you all of this later at UFO Headline News. The charts show Draco covering a lot more sky than the charts usually cover. That's because Draco is big. The serpentine star figure wanders in between the Big and Little Dippers, with its tail found between the bowl of the Big Dipper and the star Polaris. Deborah Bird, who writes this for Earth Sky, said that she always notices the two stars in the dragon's head while she's looking for the bright star Vega in the constellation Lyra. If you're familiar with that asterisk known as the summer triangle, draw the imaginary line from the star Altair through the star Vega, and that way you will find the dragon's eyes glaring at you from high overhead, July and August evenings. The two stars have names. It's Rastaban and Eltanin, lovely romantic names for the dragon stars. You can watch Draco tonight. It's going to be circling that North Star Polaris. Another noteworthy star in Draco is Thuban, Thuban, high in the sky in the evening this time of year. Thuban is an interesting star because around 3000 BC, Thuban used to be a pole star, the pole star. But that's a story for another time. The constellation Draco, by the way, has been associated with a dragon in many cultures. There's a Babylonian myth linking Draco to the dragon god Tiamat, who was subdued by the god of the sun. But here's the bottom line. Draco the Dragon on July evenings. Go look. Meet Rastaban and Eltanin, those lovely romantic names for dragon stars, representing the eyes of Draco the Dragon. Here's a rather bleak headline coming up next. Researchers searching for signs of extraterrestrial life just got some very bad news. Mike Weiner writes this for BGR News. By using Earth and our sun as a reference, scientists have spent decades honing in on conditions required for a planet to support life. The identification of the so-called Goldilocks zone, where things are just right, that's the area around a star in which liquid water can exist on the surface of a planet. And that's been the key for researchers spotting exoplanets, which are good candidates for extraterrestrial life. Unfortunately, new research conducted by astronomers at the University of Hull in England now suggests that there's plenty of stars in our own galaxy that simply cannot support life whatsoever. And as Mike Weiner puts it, it's a huge bummer. The study was initially prompted by research from 2013. That research proposed that as many as 70 billion of the up to 400 billion stars in our galaxy were of the failed brown dwarf variety. Brown dwarf stars are too hot to support life on their surface, but too cold to provide much heat to any planets that might be in their orbit. This results in a star which has no Goldilocks zone. Nothing is just right. And it essentially rules out the possibility that life exists on the surface of the planets nearby. Using that earlier study as a baseline, the team set its sights on a nearby star cluster, attempting to estimate how many brown dwarf stars it contained. The density of the failed stars in that cluster led the researchers to conclude that the 70 billion estimate reached in 2013 for our own Milky Way might actually be much lower than reality. The team now believes that as many as 100 billion of the 400 billion or so stars in our galactic backyard might be brown dwarfs. That means that potentially a full quarter or more of the stars nearest us can't even provide the conditions required for the formation and support of life. It's not great news in the search for aliens. But here's the bright side. With astronomers already spotting systems with multiple potentially life-supporting planets like TRAPPIST-1, there's no reason to completely rule out the possibility of someday meeting extraterrestrials. Indeed, far too soon to stop looking at this point. Here's a headline from Business Insider. We couldn't find a byline, but here's the headline. Chinese scientists just teleported an object into Earth's orbit for the first time. Yup, you heard correctly, gentle listeners. Teleported. Here's the story. Not long ago, in the early 1990s, scientists only speculated that teleportation using quantum physics could be possible. Since then, the process has become a standard operation in quantum optics labs around the world. In fact, just last year, 2 separate teams conducted the world's first quantum teleportation outside of a laboratory. And now, researchers in China have taken the process a few steps further. They successfully teleported a photon from Earth to a satellite orbiting more than 500 kilometers, 311 miles away. This satellite, called Micius, M-I-C-I-U-S, is a highly sensitive photo receiver capable of detecting the quantum states of single photons fired from the ground. Micius was launched to allow scientists to test various technological building blocks for quantum feats, including entanglement, cryptography, and teleportation. This teleportation feat was announced as one of the first results of these experiments. Not only did the team teleport the first object ever from the ground to orbit, they also created the first satellite-to-ground quantum network, smashing the record for the longest distance for which entanglement has been measured. Quote, long-distance teleportation has been recognized as a fundamental element in protocols such as large-scale quantum networks and distributed quantum computation, end quotes, says the Chinese team to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology Review publication. They continued, quote, previous teleportation experiments between distant locations were limited to a distance on the order of 100 kilometers due to photon loss in optical fibers or terrestrial free space channels, end quotes. Now, this article posits a question. What comes to your mind when you think of teleportation? Your brain might conjure images of Scotty beaming up the Enterprise crew in Star Trek. Oh, yeah. But it's actually quite a different process than science fiction films present, as one might figure. Quantum teleportation relies on quantum entanglement, that situation where one set of quantum objects, such as photons, form at the same instant and point in space. In this way, they share the same existence. This shared existence continues even when the photons are separated, meaning a measurement on one immediately influences the state of the other, regardless of the distance between them. This link can be used to transmit quantum information by downloading the information associated with one photon over an entangled link to another. This second photon takes on the identity of the first, and voila, teleportation. In this particular instance, the Chinese team created entangled pairs of photons on the ground at a rate of about 4,000 per second. They then beamed one of those photons to the satellite and kept the other photon on the ground. Finally, they measured the photons on the ground and in orbit and confirmed that entanglement was indeed taking place. It's worth noting there are some limits to this technology. Transporting anything large, for instance, is a ways off. In theory, there's also no maximum transportation distance. But that having been said, entanglement is fragile, and the links can easily be broken. Despite these limits, this research paves the way for even more ambitious studies of quantum teleportation. Quote, this work establishes the first ground-to-satellite uplink for faithful and ultra-long-distance quantum teleportation, an essential step toward global-scale quantum internet, end quotes. Quantum internet. Oh, there's a thought. It's Way Back Wednesday, and we're going to be looking at some basis for where this Nazi alien thing ever got its roots. Fascinating story, a totally new individual we will be historically introducing you to. So stay tuned. But right now, here's an article we picked up from UFOchronicles.com. It's an oldie. The date is 9/16/1960, and here's the headline: New angle added to flying saucers. The dateline here is Los Angeles, California. This story was picked up by the Omaha World Herald, and here it goes. A police officer says he saw a flying triangle. Officer Don Anderson at the West Los Angeles Police Station said a woman called at 7:30 a.m. She reported she saw an object hovering about 300 to 400 feet above the Douglas Aircraft Company plant in Santa Monica. Several other calls were also made about this object. Officer Anderson went outside and he saw it too. He estimated it might have been about 10 feet in diameter. A spokesman for the Douglas plant said men in control towers on either side of the airport saw nothing resembling the reported object. Curious, the Douglas Aircraft Company, but nope, there was nothing up there. Well, nothing they wanted to talk about. That was 1960. Fascinating. All right, warning, one might want to don extra protective gear for this trip to Way Back Wednesday. We're going to be talking Nazis here, so buckle up. We'll begin with these words from Wikipedia. Nazi UFOs. In ufology, conspiracy theory, science fiction, and comic book stories, claims and stories have circulated linking UFOs to Nazi Germany. The German UFO theories describe supposedly successful attempts to develop advanced aircraft or spacecraft prior to and during World War II, and further asserts the post-war survival of these craft in secret underground bases in Antarctica, South America, or the United States, along with their creators. According to these theories and fictional stories, various potential code names or subclassifications of Nazi UFO crafts were the following, and apologies in advance to our German-speaking gentle listeners. These crafts had names such as Rundflugzeug, Führball, Discus, Hanabu, Hanneberg-Gerät, Vril, V7, and Kugelblitz. Kugelblitz is not related to that actual self-propelled anti-aircraft gun of the same name. The names continue. Accounts appeared as early as 1950, likely inspired by historical German development of specialized engines, one of which was Victor Schnauberger's Repulsin around the time of World War II. Elements of these claims have been widely incorporated into various works of fictional and purportedly non-fictional media, and of course have spun off these days into video games, documentaries, much merchandise, mixing with substantial information. So here's a very interesting story, an individual we had never heard about before, and thanks again to a tip from our man in the High Castle and his copious files of content, we have today's Way Back Wednesday. So let's jump right in. Renato Vesco, that's the name, and this is information from vesco.text, written by Al Pinto from the website sacredtexts.com. Renato Vesco is a fully licensed aircraft engineer and a specialist in aerospace and ramjet developments. He attended the University of Rome, and before the Second World War, Renato Vesco studied at the German Institute for Development. During the war, Vesco worked with the Fiat Lake Garda secret installations in Italy. In the 1960s, he worked for the Italian Air Ministry of Defense as an undercover technical agent, investigating the UFO mystery. Here is what Mr. Renato Vesco writes, quote, on November 27, 1944, a B-27 of the United States Air Force, returning from a raid on Speyer, West Germany, encountered a huge orange-colored light moving upward at an estimated speed of 500 miles per hour. When the pilots reported,
I love the summer. There's so much to do. Driving my new Volkswagen Jetta to the lake, driving it to the beach, driving it home after a weekend at the beach. See, I got a great deal from my local Volkswagen dealer. And with available features like adaptive cruise control, blind spot monitor, and rear traffic alert, this Jetta is all about confidence. I think I'll drive it up to the mountains this weekend. I might even go hiking, if I have time.
Test drive the Volkswagen Jetta this summer at your local Volkswagen dealer.
Radar had reported negatively because nothing had registered on their screens. But the object seen by the returning bomber was only the first of numerous others spotted by American pilots over wartime Germany. They were promptly baptized Foo Fighters. Fighter pilots from the 415th Squadron reported such an encounter a month later, and that forced the United States Air Force to admit that such objects might exist. Later encounters with Foo Fighters led experts to assume they were German inventions of a new order employed to baffle radar. How closely they came to the truth, they learned only when the war was over, and Allied intelligence teams moved into the secret Nazi plants. The Foo Fighters, seen by American pilots, were only a minor demonstration, a fraction of a vast variety of methods used to confuse radar to interrupt electromagnetic currents. Work on the German anti-radar Führerball or Fireball had been speeding up during the fall of 1944 at a Luftwaffe experimental center near Oberammergau, Bavaria. There, and at the aeronautical establishment at Wiener Neustadt, the first fireballs were produced. Later, when the Russians moved closer to Austria, the workshops producing the fireballs were moved to the Black Forest. Fast and remote-controlled, the fireballs, equipped with Klyston tubes, that's spelled K-L-I-S-T-O-N, and operating on the same frequency as Allied radar, could eliminate the blips from radar screens and remain practically invisible to ground control. And Renato Vesco fits into this. Interestingly enough, his curriculum vitae, his bio, reads slightly differently depending upon whom one consults, as far as his background and his places of employment. And now we switch to Nazi UFO mythos.Grey Falcon, and that's the website that brings us this information. The Nazi UFO mythos. Once again, here is Renato Vesco. He was an Italian. He wrote 3 books in his own language, only one of which was translated into English. He also had an article published in the August 1969 edition of the United States men's magazine, Argosy, which was probably little more than a hack writer's rendering of the material from his book. That article was entitled, Aerospace Expert Claims Flying Saucers Are Canada's Secret Weapon, and in the introduction to the piece, there first appears the statement which lies at the heart of the authority Renato Vesco has come to command over the years. Here's what that quote said, quote, Renato Vesco is a fully licensed aircraft engineer and a specialist in aerospace and ramjet developments. He attended the University of Rome and before the Second World War studied at the German Institute for Aerial Development. During the war, Vesco worked with the Germans at the Fiat Lake Garda secret installations in Italy. In the 60s, he worked for the Italian Air Ministry of Defense as an undercover technical agent, investigating the UFO mystery. End quotes. And that tracks pretty much with the original bio. It does get strange later. Things are omitted, things are added. In selections from the book, here's what Renato Vesco says about the supposed Führerball, Fireball, and Kugelblitz in the paperback version of, quote, Intercept UFO, end quotes, the shortened title of his work. Quote, another center run by Speer and the SS Technical General Staff had adopted the idea of employing, quote, proximity radio interference, end quotes, on the very much more delicate and hence more vulnerable electronic apparatuses of the American night fighters. Thus, a highly original flying machine was born. It was circular and armored, more or less resembling the shell of a tortoise, and was powered by a special turbojet engine, which was also flat and circular, whose principles of operation recalled the well-known aeropile of Hero, that legendary thing, and generated a great halo of luminous flames. Hence, it was named Fireball. It was unarmed and pilotless. Radio-controlled at the moment of takeoff, it then automatically followed enemy aircraft, attracted by their exhaust flames, and it approached close enough without collision and wrecked their radio gear. The fiery halo around its perimeter, caused by a very rich fuel mixture, and the chemical additives that interrupted the flow of electricity, they did that by over-ionizing the atmosphere in the vicinity of the plane, generally around the wingtips, and this subjected the H-2S radar on the plane to the action of powerful electrostatic fields and electromagnetic impulses, the latter generated by the large klystron radio tubes protected with special anti-shock and anti-heat armor. Since a metal arc carrying an oscillating current of the proper frequency, that is, equal to the frequency used by the radar station, can cancel the blips, the return signals from the target, the Fireball was almost undetectable by the most powerful American radar of the time, despite its nighttime visibility. In addition, the sorry builders of the device hoped, and their hateful hopes were fulfilled, that when the Allied flyers, not knowing their nature or purpose, noticed that the fiery balls were apparently harmless, they wouldn't fire on these enormous-looking, inoffensive devices for fear of being caught in some gigantic explosion. More than one, in fact. As they fearfully watched those huge lights come in, the American pilots thought that some German technician on the ground was perhaps getting ready to push a button and cause these Foo Fighters to explode. Project Fireball was constructed first at the aeronautical establishment at Wiener Neustadt, with the help of the Flugfunkforschungsanstalt of Oberpfadenhofen, FFO, insofar as radio control of the missile was concerned. But was this really a missile, postulates this writer. One person who saw that first short test flight of the device without its electrical gear says that, quote, during the day, it looked like a shining disk spinning on its axis, and during the night it looked like a burning globe, end quotes. Hermann Goering inspected the progress of the work a number of times, for he hoped, and in fact it happened, that the mechanical principle could also later be used to produce an offensive weapon capable of revolutionizing the entire field of aerial warfare. We're going to call a halt to this talk of aerial warfare and Foo Fighters and Führerballs for this Way Back Wednesday. There's too much content to fit into one. During our next Way Back Wednesday, we'll continue with the Nazi UFO mythos. We'll learn more about Renato Vesco and his true age, which is something of a mystery. We might even venture down to the ice under Antarctica and see what's up underneath that. Time is a human construct, but we're out of it for this broadcast. We've got to fly because that's a wrap. Thank you for listening to Inception Radio Network. Follow today's broadcast at ufoheadlinenews.com. Take care of each other. We're all in this together. This is Carol Carl. See you tomorrow.